This house needs cleansing from her influence. That is what my mother-in-law whispered to 3 strangers she brought into my home while I was at work. She did not know about the microphone. She did not know about the log that tracked every single time she punched in her code, 26 times in 35 days. She walked into my house 26 times, and not once, not a single time, was she invited. Enjoy listening to my story. There is a brass key sitting in my junk drawer right now. It is on a beaded keychain with a little cross charm, the kind they sell in bulk at church gift shops for $2.50. I know this because Patty Walsh, my mother-in-law, mentioned the charm 3 times. Once when she had the key made, once when she showed it to Connor like she had been handed the keys to the Vatican, and once when she pressed it into my palm with both hands and told me it was for emergencies. Emergencies. She said that word the way people say cancer or tornado. Grave. Serious. Like a 1,400-square-foot bungalow in East Nashville was one electrical fire away from total destruction, and only Patty Walsh, church choir director and self-appointed guardian of all things holy, could save it. The house cost $267,000. We closed on it the second week of March. Connor, that is my husband, had just landed a steady gig as a session musician at a studio on Music Row. Steady, in musician terms, means he was getting called back more than once a month, which in Nashville is practically a government pension. I had been working as a veterinary technician at a clinic on Gallatin Pike for close to 4 years. The kind of job where you spend your mornings expressing anal glands and your afternoons explaining to people that their dog is not depressed, he is just fat. We were happy. We were terrified. We were 2 people in their early 30s staring at a mortgage payment that made our student loans look like pocket change, and we were doing it together. Patty had a copy of our key within 6 days. At the time, it seemed generous, even sweet, in a way that made you feel guilty for questioning it. She said it was because Connor had a habit of forgetting his keys, which was true. Connor once locked himself out of his own car in the parking lot of a Waffle House on Dickerson Pike at 11:30 at night because he left his keys on the table next to a plate of scattered and smothered hash browns. So the key thing made sense, on paper. What did not make sense was Patty's delivery. She did not just hand over a key, she presented it, both hands, eye contact, a small speech about how family takes care of family, and how she wanted us to know she was always there. Always. She said always twice, which in hindsight was less a promise and more a prophecy. I should tell you about the house. Because the house matters. It was a 3-bedroom bungalow built in 1952, the kind with original hardwood floors that creaked in the hallway and a front porch just wide enough for 2 chairs and a bad decision. The neighborhood was in that stage of gentrification where a craft cocktail bar sits next to a laundromat that has been there since the Carter administration, and everyone pretends that is charming instead of economically complicated. We moved in on a Saturday. By Wednesday, I had adopted a cat. His name is Biscuit. Orange tabby, 3 years old, one slightly crooked ear from a life I do not want to think too hard about. I found him at the shelter on Harding Place the same week my grandmother had her second stroke. Grandma May, 84 years old, still living in her little house in Knoxville, still threading needles without glasses, still calling me every Sunday to ask if I was eating enough. The stroke was mild, the doctors said. She would recover. But for 3 days I did not know that. And during those 3 days I walked into a shelter and a cat with a crooked ear climbed into my lap and did not move for 45 minutes. I adopted him that afternoon. Grandma May saw him through FaceTime 2 days later. She laughed so hard she coughed, and then she said, "Well, he looks like a biscuit to me." So biscuit he was. The first time I realized Patty had used her key, I came home from the clinic on a Tuesday in April, and there were 3 scripture cards on the kitchen counter. Small laminated rectangles, the kind with a Bible verse on one side and a stock photo of a sunset on the other. Psalms 23 on the counter by the coffee maker, Proverbs 31 by the stove, and Romans 8:28 on the windowsill above the sink, propped up against my bottle of dish soap like a tiny holy billboard. There was also a small glass bottle of holy water on the shelf by the front door. No note, no text. Just scripture and sanctified liquid, placed in my home while I was at work, like a spiritual room service that nobody ordered. Connor told me she had mentioned wanting to bless the house. He said this like it explained everything. Like a 63-year-old woman entering someone else's home uninvited to distribute laminated Bible verses was just a personality trait. like being left-handed or preferring decaf. I moved the scripture cards to a drawer. I put the holy water under the bathroom sink. I did not say anything to Patty because I am not a confrontational person. I am a person who communicates through drawer placement and silence, which, looking back, was probably the wrong approach. But that was the paper cut, tiny, explainable, barely worth mentioning. Then came the evening that changed how I understood Patty Walsh entirely. It was a Sunday dinner at her condo in Hendersonville, the kind where she served pot roast and judgment in roughly equal portions. Biscuit had come up in conversation because Connor mentioned the vet bill from his last checkup, and Patty looked at me across the table with an expression I can only describe as spiritual disgust. "Cats are not clean animals, you know," she said. "It is in scripture." I want to be clear about something. I have a degree in veterinary science. I have spent 4 years of my professional life ensuring the health and cleanliness of animals. And my mother-in-law just told me, over pot roast, that my cat was biblically unclean. Connor did not correct her. He reached for the breadbasket and changed the subject to the Titans game, which is his version of conflict resolution. If I had known that one little key would cost me a quilt, a cat, and nearly my marriage, I would have changed the lock that first week. But she was family, and in this family, that word carried the weight of a commandment. The first thing Patty rearranged was not the furniture, it was the walls. I need to explain something about our house before this makes sense. When Connor and I moved in, I spent 3 weekends decorating, not in a Pinterest-perfect throw-pillow empire kind of way, just in a, this is our home and I want it to feel like us kind of way. I hung landscape prints from the flea market on 8th Avenue, a photograph of Biscuit from the day I adopted him, crooked ear and all, a watercolor of the Smoky Mountains that reminded me of Grandma May's porch, a framed concert poster from the first show Connor ever played in Nashville, some dive bar on Broadway where the sound system was held together with duct tape and optimism. These were not expensive pieces. They were us. And one Tuesday in late May, I came home from the clinic and they were gone. Every single one. Replaced. Where Biscuit's adoption photo had hung, there was now a framed print of the Last Supper. Where the Smoky Mountains watercolor had been, a cross-stitch that read, "The Lord is my shepherd in gold thread." Where Connor's concert poster had been, a wooden plaque with Philippians 4:13. The nails were different. Patty had pulled out my little brass nails and replaced them with screws. She had used screws and a drill, in my walls, without asking. My artwork was stacked in the garage, leaning against the recycling bin like it was waiting to be discarded. There is something deeply disorienting about walking into your own home and not recognizing it. Like jet lag, but for your identity. You are standing in the right place, but nothing feels right, and the person responsible is not a stranger. She is your husband's mother, and she has a key, and she apparently also has a drill. Connor came home, looked at the walls, nodded slowly, and said, "She is just really religious." I need to tell you about Connor's 3 phrases, because they are going to come up often and you should be prepared for them the way you prepare for weather. Phrase 1. She is just really religious. This was the mild response. It covered everything from scripture cards to unsolicited holy water to the complete spiritual redecoration of our living room. It was Connor's way of saying, this is normal, even when it was the furthest thing from normal since the invention of abnormal. Phrase 2. It is a generational thing. This was the medium response. It appeared when Patty crossed into personal territory, when she rearranged the bathroom cabinet, when she told me at a barbecue that my shorts were a little short for a married woman. It is a generational thing, Connor would say, as if being born in 1963 in Gallatin, Tennessee, was some kind of anthropological explanation for everything. Phrase 3. Music calms everything down, just give it time. This was the nuclear option. It appeared when I was crying or sitting in silence in a way that made Connor nervous. He approached marital conflict the way he approached a complicated chord progression, with patience, repetition, and the firm belief that it would all come together in the bridge. I could predict which phrase was coming based on severity. Mild invasion, she is just really religious. Medium boundary crossing, it is a generational thing. Full-scale spiritual takeover, music calms everything down. He rotated through them like a set list at a gig he had played 100 times. I rehung every piece that night. Biscuit back where he belonged, the Smoky Mountains on the living room wall. 2 days later, I came home and they were gone again. Same positions, Same replacements, but this time, Patty had used wall anchors, the heavy-duty kind you use for a 50-pound mirror, not a cross-stitch about shepherds. She had escalated from screws to anchors, which in home improvement terms is the equivalent of going from a strongly worded letter to a restraining order. She left an index card on the counter in her careful cursive. I redecorated a little. The living room feels more peaceful now, do you not think? Smiley face. She drew a smiley face. She drilled anchors into my walls and drew a smiley face about it. I stopped rehanging after the third time, not because I agreed with her, because fighting someone who owns a drill and the unshakable belief that God is on her side is a war of attrition I was not yet equipped to win. The Sunday dinners were where Patty performed for her real audience. Every other week, after church, the family gathered at her condo in Hendersonville. Patty, Connor, me, and a rotating cast of women from her prayer circle, who all owned the same cardigan in different colors and who all called me sweetie in a tone that meant they had been briefed. It was at one of these dinners, early June, that Patty made my housekeeping a public topic. She put down her fork, looked at Connor, not at me, at Connor, and said, "Have you had a chance to deep clean the hallway yet? I noticed last time I stopped by that the floor had some scuff marks. And the shoe rack," she paused, choosing her words the way a surgeon chooses a scalpel, well, it could use some attention. Last time she stopped by. She said it like she had been invited. Like stopping by was a scheduled event between two consenting adults and not a woman with a drill letting herself into someone else's home to inspect their shoe rack. Connor stared at his plate with the intensity of a man trying to telepathically transport himself to another dimension, a dimension where his mother and his wife existed on separate planets and he never had to choose. Driving home on Long Hollow Pike, I told Connor his mother's comments bothered me. He was quiet for 6 seconds. "She is just really religious," he said. And then, like a bonus track nobody asked for, she grew up different. A fourth phrase, an expansion pack. But Patty was just warming up. The walls were only the beginning. Because Patty Walsh did not just want to redecorate my house, she wanted to redecorate my life. And she was about to go after the one thing I could not hang back on a nail. There are mistakes you can fix with an apology, and then there are mistakes that meow at your back door 3 days later, skinny and terrified, with a look in their eyes that says, "I trusted you to keep me safe." Summer in Nashville is not a season. It is a punishment. The air sits on your skin like a warm, wet towel that nobody asked for, and by July, the heat has a personal vendetta against every living thing that did not evolve with gills. I worked the early shift at the clinic most days that summer, 6:30 to 3, which meant leaving the house before Connor was fully conscious, and getting home in that strange late afternoon window where the day feels used up but not quite finished. It was a Thursday in the middle of July when I pulled into the driveway and noticed the back door was open. Not wide open, not kicked in open, just open about 4 inches, the way a door looks when someone leaves in a hurry and does not pull it all the way shut. The kind of open that most people would not even notice, except I noticed, because I always locked that door, every morning, without exception. It was part of my routine, the way feeding Biscuit was part of my routine. Lock the back door, check the stove, kiss the cat, leave. I called for Biscuit before I even put my bag down. He usually met me in the hallway. That was our thing. I would open the front door and he would be sitting there, crooked ear tilted slightly to the left, looking at me with the calm superiority that only cats and tenured professors can pull off. But the hallway was empty. The kitchen was empty. The living room, the bedroom, the bathroom, the spare room, empty. I checked the Ring doorbell footage on my phone. Patty had arrived at 11:20 in the morning. She left at 1:45 in the afternoon, 2 hours and 25 minutes. The front door camera showed her entering and leaving. The back door was not visible from that angle, which meant I could not prove she had opened it. But I knew. The way you know it is going to rain before the sky changes color. The way you know a phone call at 2 in the morning is never good news. Biscuit was gone. I want you to understand what that cat meant to me, because otherwise the next 3 days will not make sense. Biscuit was not just a pet. He was a timestamp. He was the physical, breathing, purring proof of the worst and best week of my life. The week Grandma May had her stroke. The week I sat in a hospital waiting room in Knoxville for 9 hours reading the same magazine page over and over because my eyes could not focus. The week I drove back to Nashville on Interstate 40 with my hands shaking on the steering wheel because the doctors said she would recover, but my body had not gotten the message yet. That was the week I walked into the shelter on Harding Place, and an orange tabby with a crooked ear chose me. He climbed into my lap and stayed. He did not know my grandmother was in a hospital bed. He did not know I had been crying in my car in the parking lot for 15 minutes before I walked in. He just knew I needed something warm and alive and present, and he showed up. Grandma May saw him on FaceTime 2 days later from her hospital bed. She laughed so hard the nurse came in to check on her. "He looks like a biscuit to me," she said, and she was right. He looked exactly like a biscuit. And now he was gone, because someone left my back door open on a Thursday in July in Nashville, Tennessee, where the temperature was 94 degrees and the neighborhood had coyotes. I searched for 3 days. I left work early on Friday, called in sick on Saturday, and spent Sunday morning walking every alley and side street in East Nashville with a bag of treats and a voice that got more desperate with every hour. I made flyers at the FedEx on Main Street, 40 copies, $2.60. Orange tabby, crooked left ear, answers to biscuit, please call. I taped them to every telephone pole and community board within a mile of our house. Connor helped. I will give him that. He walked the blocks south of Shelby Park while I took the north side. He posted on 3 neighborhood Facebook groups. He checked under every porch and behind every dumpster. But he also said, on Saturday night, while I was sitting on the back porch staring at the tree line, "Cats come back, Adrian. They always come back. Give it time. Give it time." There it was, the acoustic version of phrase 3. Sunday evening. 3 days gone. I was sitting on the back steps watching the fireflies blink in the yard like tiny broken signals when I heard it. A small, rough sound. Not quite a meow. More like what a meow becomes after 3 days of July heat and no food, and whatever else happens to a house cat alone in East Nashville. Biscuit was at the bottom of the steps. Thin, dirty. His crooked ear was flat against his head. He looked up at me and made that sound again, and I picked him up and held him against my chest and sat on those steps for I do not know how long. He was lighter. I could feel his ribs. His fur was matted and there was a scratch across his nose that had already started to scab. But he was alive. He was home. And he was purring, which is the thing about cats that breaks your heart, the way they forgive you before you have even figured out how to forgive yourself. I called Patty the next morning. I kept my voice steady, which cost me more than I want to admit. I asked if she had been in the house on Thursday. She said yes, she had stopped by to drop off a casserole dish she had been meaning to return. I asked if she had used the back door. She paused. "I might have left it open on accident," she said. "But honestly, Adrian, cats belong outside. That is how God made them." 6 words. That is how God made them. She used the name of God to justify why my cat spent 3 days starving in a Nashville summer. And Connor, my husband, the man who had walked every block south of Shelby Park, looked at me that evening and said, "She probably did not realize the door was open." 6 words. She used 6 words in the name of God to explain why my cat spent 3 days alone in 94-degree heat with coyotes and traffic, and no food and no water, and no idea how to survive outside because he had never been. Outside, because he was a house cat, because I kept him safe, because that was my job, and someone else decided it was not important enough to close a door. That is how God made them. Like Scripture had a specific verse about indoor cats and screen doors and negligence. Like somewhere in Leviticus there is a passage that reads, "And lo, thou shalt leave thy daughter-in-law's back door open in the middle of July, for the tabby cat is an abomination and belongs in the yard." Chapter and verse. Patty. Show me chapter and verse. I did not say any of that. Not to Patty, not to Connor. I did not say anything at all that night, which was its own kind of language. I sat on the couch with Biscuit in my lap, his ribs under my fingers, his purr vibrating against my stomach like a small engine running on nothing but relief, and I listened to my husband tell me that his mother probably did not realize the door was open. Probably did not realize. The woman who notices a scuff mark on my hallway floor from 6 feet away, who reorganized my bathroom cabinet by product category, who drilled wall anchors into my living room to hang a cross-stitch she bought at a church bazaar. That woman did not realize she left a door open for 2 hours in the middle of summer. In a house with a cat, she has made her feelings about abundantly and scripturally clear. That night, After Connor fell asleep, I locked the bedroom door. Not the front door, not the back door, the bedroom door, the one between me and the man I married. I sat on the edge of the bed in the dark and cried without making a sound, which is a skill you develop when you realize that the person who promised to protect you cannot tell the difference between an accident and an attack. Because that was the truth I had been avoiding. I was not fighting one person. I was fighting two. Patty was the visible problem, the one with the key and the drill and the holy water and the opinions about cats. But Connor was the invisible one, the one who absorbed every blow on my behalf and then handed it back to me wrapped in one of his 3 phrases like it was a gift. She is just really religious. It is a generational thing. Give it time. 3 phrases. 0 protection. I did not start a notebook that night. Not yet. But something shifted. A door closed inside me the same way a door had been left open in my house, and what walked out was the version of me that still believed this would get better on its own. Fall came to Nashville the way it always does, slowly and then all at once, the trees on Shelby Avenue turning orange and red like the city was putting on a show it had rehearsed all year. The heat broke, the mornings got sharp. Biscuit gained his weight back and resumed his hallway post like a soldier returning to duty after medical leave. Life settled into something that felt almost normal, if you did not look too closely at the cracks. It was during one of those early autumn evenings that I first really noticed Connor's vinyl collection. I had always known about it. The records lived on a custom shelf he had built in the spare bedroom, 47 of them, each one in its original sleeve, organized not alphabetically or by genre, but by some private system that only Connor understood and that he described as vibes, which told me everything and nothing at the same time. But I had never asked him the full story until that October night when he put on a record I had not heard before. An old country album, scratchy and warm, the kind of sound that makes you feel like you are sitting on someone's porch in 1971, drinking sweet tea and watching the sun go down. Connor's grandfather, Earl Walsh Sr., played guitar at the Grand Ole Opry exactly once, fall of 1971. He was not famous. He was a carpenter from Hendersonville who played bluegrass at church picnics and county fairs and who got one shot, one single night, on that stage. He played a song called Pine Mountain Morning that he wrote himself, and according to family legend, he was so nervous his hands shook through the first verse, but by the chorus he was steady, and by the bridge he was smiling. He died in 1989. Connor was 4. He did not remember his grandfather's voice, but he remembered his hands. Big hands, he told me once, like baseball gloves with calluses. The 47 records were what was left, not just of Earl Walsh Sr.'s music taste, but of his life. Records he had bought at shops in downtown Nashville, when downtown was still more honky-tonk than tourist trap. Records he had played in his workshop while building furniture. Records he had danced to with Connor's grandmother in their kitchen on Saturday nights. And one record, the one Connor put on that October evening, that had a handwritten note on the inner sleeve. Opry night, October 71. Hands stopped shaking by the chorus. Earl's handwriting, the only written record of the best night of his life. Connor held that sleeve like it was made of glass. He did not say anything. He just held it and listened, and for a moment I saw the version of my husband that existed underneath the 3 phrases. The version that loved deeply and specifically and quietly, the way his grandfather loved a stage he only stood on once. Those 47 records were irreplaceable. I knew it. Connor knew it. And Patty, who had walked past that shelf every time she let herself into our house, who had once looked at it and said all that worldly noise with the same tone she used for my cat, Patty knew it too. Connor's grandfather played guitar at the Grand Ole Opry exactly once, in the fall of 1971. The records he left behind were worth more than money. They were worth memory. And Patty was about to throw them in a donation bin like they were old magazines. The shelf was empty, not dusty empty, like something had been there for years and slowly faded away. Clean empty, wiped down empty. The kind of empty that only happens when someone removes every single item with purpose and then wipes the surface afterward like they are cleaning up a crime scene, which, in a way, they were. I came home from the clinic on a Friday in late October and stood in the doorway of the spare bedroom staring at a shelf that used to hold 47 vinyl records and now held nothing but the faint rectangular outlines where the sleeves had been. Dust shadows. That is what they looked like, the ghosts of things that used to matter. The Ring doorbell log showed Patty arriving at 10:15 in the morning with 2 reusable shopping bags. The large kind, the kind you take to the farmer's market when you plan to buy more than tomatoes. She left at 12:40 with the same 2 bags, and they were full. I called Connor at the studio. He came home in 30 minutes, which was fast for him because Music Row traffic on a Friday afternoon moves at the speed of a philosophical debate. He stood in front of the empty shelf and did not say anything for a while. I watched his face do something I had never seen before. It was not anger exactly. It was more like the expression a building makes right before it collapses, still on the outside, disintegrating on the inside. He called Patty. She answered on the second ring, which meant she had been expecting the call, which meant she knew exactly what she had done and had been sitting by her phone in her condo in Hendersonville, waiting for the conversation like a defendant waiting for a verdict she had already rehearsed an appeal for. She told him the records were worldly music, not suitable for a God-fearing household. She said she had been praying about it for weeks and that the Lord had placed it on her heart to remove the temptation. Temptation. She called 47 vinyl records that belonged to a dead man a temptation. Like Earl Walsh, Sr.'s handwritten note about his hands shaking at the Opry was a gateway drug to moral decay. She had taken them to the Goodwill on Gallatin Pike. Connor drove there. I followed in my car because I did not trust myself to sit in the same vehicle without saying something that could not be unsaid. The Goodwill on Gallatin Pike is the kind of place where other people's memories end up on shelves between used coffee makers and jigsaw puzzles with missing pieces. I had donated things there myself. Old clothes, kitchen gadgets, books I would never reread. But I had never gone there to recover something that was stolen from me by someone who thought God told her to do it. They found 41 records, 41 out of 47. They were in a bin near the back of the store, not yet priced, not yet sorted, just sitting in a cardboard box between a broken lamp and a stack of Reader's Digest magazines from 2009. Connor went through them one by one, checking each sleeve, reading each label. His hands were steady, but his jaw was tight, the way it gets when he is holding something inside that does not have a melody. 6 records were already gone. Sold or sorted into another location, or simply lost in the system the way things get lost when they are surrendered by someone who had no right to surrender them. Among the 6 was the one with the handwritten note. Opry Night, October 71. Hands stopped shaking by the chorus. Earl's record. Earl's handwriting. The only physical proof that a carpenter from Hendersonville once stood on the most famous stage in country music and played a song he wrote himself and smiled by the bridge. Gone. Sold for probably $1.50 to someone who would never know what it meant. Connor sat in his car in the Goodwill parking lot for 20 minutes. I sat in mine, 2 spaces over, watching him through the windshield. He did not cry. He did not hit the steering wheel. He just sat there with his hands on the wheel at 10 and 2, staring at nothing, like a man who had just been told something he already knew, but had been refusing to hear. I thought that was it. I thought the vinyl would be the thing that finally broke through. 47 records, his grandfather's legacy. 6 of them gone forever, including the one that mattered most. Surely this was the line. Surely this was the moment Connor Walsh would pick up the phone and tell his mother that she had gone too far and that the key was no longer hers. He did pick up the phone. He called Patty that evening from the kitchen while I was in the bedroom pretending to read a book about native Tennessee wildflowers that I had been meaning to start for 4 months. I could hear his voice through the wall. It started firm. It started with Mom. Those were Grandpa Earl's records. And for about 8 seconds I felt something close to hope. Then I heard Patty cry. Not subtle crying, the kind of crying that sounds like it was rehearsed in front of a bathroom mirror. The kind that comes with phrases like, "I was only trying to protect you and I prayed about it and the Lord told me." Performance grief. Professional grade guilt deployment. And Connor's voice changed. It softened. It bent. It folded like a lawn chair in a windstorm, and by the end of the conversation, I heard him say the 5 words that told me exactly where I stood in the hierarchy of this family. She feels terrible about it. She feels terrible. The woman who prayed for weeks about stealing her dead father-in-law's vinyl collection, who loaded them into reusable shopping bags with the calm efficiency of someone who had planned the operation down to the bag count, who drove to Goodwill and handed over 47 irreplaceable records without flinching. She feels terrible. I closed the bedroom door and sat on the bed. Biscuit jumped up and pressed himself against my thigh, which is what he does when he senses that the atmospheric pressure in the room has dropped below emotional sea level. I scratched behind his crooked ear and stared at the wall and thought about the fact that my husband had just watched his grandfather's legacy get donated to a thrift store by his own mother, and his response was to feel sorry for her. That was the moment I understood something I had been circling for months. Connor was never going to choose, not because he did not love me, he did, but because choosing meant telling Patty she was wrong, and telling Patty she was wrong meant losing her, and losing her was a math problem Connor could not solve. So he chose the middle, the gray zone, the place where everything was unfortunate but nobody was at fault, and time would fix what courage would not. I was not building a case. I want to be clear about that, because what I am about to describe sounds like strategy, and at the time, it was not strategy. It was survival. The notebook was a yellow legal pad from a 3-pack I bought at the Dollar General on Gallatin Road for $2.99. Nothing special, nothing premeditated. I grabbed it on a Tuesday evening after work because I needed to write something down before the weight of it crushed me from the inside, and writing has always been the way I process things I cannot say out loud. I sat at the kitchen table that night with a black pen and drew 3 columns. Column 1, date. Column 2, what changed. Column 3, what disappeared. Simple, clean. Like a ledger for a business that was slowly going bankrupt, except the currency was not money, it was sanity, and the accountant was a woman in her pajamas with a cat on her lap and a pen that was running low on ink. The first entry was retroactive. March, scripture cards and holy water. April through May, artwork replaced 3 times, screws, then anchors. July, back door left open, biscuit missing 3 days. October, 47 vinyl records removed, 6 lost permanently, including Opry record with Earl's handwriting. 4 entries. 4 months of evidence that I was not exaggerating, not being dramatic, not overreacting. Because that is what happens when someone you love tells you she means well enough times. You start to believe him. You start to wonder if maybe the scripture cards were a gift. Maybe the artwork was an improvement. Maybe cats do belong outside. Maybe 47 records are just worldly noise. And maybe you are the problem, standing in the middle of your own home feeling like a stranger, unable to prove that anything is wrong because the person doing the wrong thing is family and the person who should be stopping her is asleep next to you. The notebook was my sanity check. Date, item, gone. It was real because I wrote it down. November brought something I was not expecting, not from Patty, though she continued her visits with the regularity of a postal service that delivered judgment instead of mail. The surprise came from my neighbor. Mrs. Kim lived in the yellow craftsman house 2 doors down. She was 70 years old, Korean-American, a retired piano teacher who kept 3 cats of her own and a garden that made the rest of the block look like amateurs. I had spoken to her maybe a dozen times since we moved in, mostly about cats and tomato plants, which in East Nashville constitutes a deep and meaningful friendship. She knocked on my door on a Saturday morning in early November holding a piece of paper. It was a letter, typed, unsigned, addressed to our landlord. Except we did not have a landlord, we owned the house. The letter had been sent to the property management company listed on the old rental listing that still appeared online from before we bought it. Someone had looked up our address and found the wrong contact and sent a complaint about unsanitary conditions caused by feral animals being kept on the property, and a request that the issue be addressed before it affected neighboring home values. Feral animals. She meant Biscuit. She meant my cat, who had never set foot outside until someone left the back door open and then blamed God for it. Mrs. Kim handed me the letter and said, "I know who wrote this. I know Patty's handwriting. She signs the church bulletins every Sunday, and she has that same little curl on her capital P's." This was typed, but the envelope was hand-addressed. Same curl. Same P. I looked at the envelope. Patricia Walsh. She had used her formal first name like that, made it anonymous. Like the entire congregation at Grace Community Church did not know exactly who Patricia Walsh was and exactly what her handwriting looked like. Mrs. Kim stood on my porch and looked at me with the kind of steady, patient expression that only women over 70 can produce. The kind that says, "I have seen enough of this world to know exactly what is happening here, and I am not going to pretend otherwise." She said, "I do not know the whole story, and I am not asking, but that woman has been coming to your house almost every week, and every time she leaves, something in your yard is different. Last week she moved your welcome mat. I do not know why a person moves someone else's welcome mat, but I noticed. She noticed. Someone noticed. I thanked Mrs. Kim, and she went home, and I sat on the porch with the letter in my hand, feeling something I had not felt in months. Witnessed. Someone besides me had seen what was happening and had confirmed, without being asked, that it was not normal. That it was not a generational thing. That it was not how God made anything. The next week, I told Tasha. Tasha Brooks was a senior veterinary technician at the clinic. 36, divorced, the kind of woman who drank black coffee from a mug that said "Not today" in a font that meant every single letter. She had been at the clinic for 8 years and had an almost supernatural ability to tell when something was wrong based entirely on how aggressively I was restocking the supply closet. She caught me on a Wednesday during lunch break, asked what was going on, and I told her everything. The key, the scripture cards, the walls, biscuit, the vinyl, the letter, the notebook with its 3 neat columns that were starting to fill up like a medical chart for a patient nobody was treating. Tasha listened without interrupting, which was unusual for her because Tasha had opinions about everything and delivered them with the precision of a surgeon and the subtlety of a car alarm. When I finished, she put down her coffee mug, looked me dead in the eyes and said, "Honey, that is not a mother-in-law, that is a landlord with a Bible." I laughed. It was the first real laugh I had produced in weeks, and it came out sounding rusty, like a door hinge that had not been used in a long time. Tasha did not laugh with me. She just watched me laugh with the expression of someone who knew that humor was the last wall standing before the flood, and she was going to let me have it for as long as I needed. The notebook had 7 entries by the end of October. By November, it would have 14. But the worst entry, the one I wrote in capital letters with the pen pressing so hard it tore through the paper, that one was coming. And it involved a quilt. My grandmother, May Johnson, was 84 years old, and she could still thread a needle without glasses. She said it was because she had been doing it since she was 6, and her hands remembered what her eyes had started to forget. That is the thing about hands. They hold memory differently than minds do. They hold it in muscle and motion, in the way they fold dough or grip a fishing rod, or guide a needle through fabric at a pace that has not changed in 78 years. May lived alone in a small brick house in Knoxville that she and my grandfather Earl had bought in 1967 for $11,000. Earl died in 2014, and May stayed because that is what May did. She stayed, she tended her garden. She made biscuits from scratch every Saturday morning, even though there was no one to eat them except her and the neighbor's dog, who had learned to show up at her back door at exactly 7:45 because May Johnson's biscuits were worth the commute. The quilt took her 7 months. She started it in the spring and finished it in the fall, and when she called to tell me it was done, her voice had that particular quality it got when she was proud of something but did not want to say so directly, because May Johnson considered pride a character flaw and humility the only appropriate response to having made something beautiful. It was a patchwork quilt, and every single patch was cut from one of my grandfather Earl's old shirts, 23 patches. 23 pieces of a man who had been gone for almost 10 years, but whose closet May had never emptied because she said the shirts still smelled like him if you held them close enough, and I believed her, because love makes believers out of everyone. I need to tell you about the patches because they matter. They matter the way a name matters on a headstone, not because of the material, but because of what it holds. The red flannel patch was from the shirt Earl wore every Saturday morning when he went fishing at Douglas Lake. He had owned that shirt for 30 years, and it had been mended so many times that May said it was more thread than flannel by the end. But he refused to throw it out because he said the fish recognized it. May laughed every time she told that story. She laughed like it was brand new, even though she had told it 100 times. That is how you know someone was loved well. The stories about them never get old. The denim patch was from the overall Earl wore the day he taught me to drive. I was 15. His truck was a 1987 Ford that pulled to the left and had a radio that only played AM stations. He let me drive it around the church parking lot for an hour and never once raised his voice, even when I almost took out the pastor's mailbox. He just said, well, the pastor could use a new mailbox anyway, and we kept going. The white cotton patch was from the dress shirt Earl wore the day he married May. August 14th, 1965. She had kept it in a cedar chest for almost 60 years, wrapped in tissue paper that had yellowed and softened with time. When she cut into it for the quilt, she told me later she cried, not because she was sad, because she was turning something precious into something permanent, and that is a kind of grief that looks like creation. 23 patches, each one a story. Each one a piece of a man who built bookshelves and grew tomatoes and danced with his wife in the kitchen on Saturday nights to Patsy Cline on a radio that picked up 2 stations, and who once told me, when I was 12 and upset about something I cannot even remember now, that the people who love you will always come back to the kitchen. I did not understand that then. I understand it now. May mailed the quilt to me in a flat-rate box from the post office on Chapman Highway. She wrapped it in the same tissue paper from the cedar chest, which I thought was the most May Johnson thing she had ever done, recycling sentiment with the same care she recycled everything else. I put it on our bed the night it arrived. It was not perfect. Some of the stitches were uneven. One corner was slightly longer than the other 3. The colors clashed in places, red flannel next to white cotton, next to a green plaid that I think was from Earl's Christmas shirt, though May could not remember for certain. It was imperfect and beautiful and alive in the way that only handmade things are alive, and every night I slept under it I felt like I was being held by people who were not there anymore, but whose love was stitched into every seam. That quilt was on my bed for 4 months, and then one Thursday in the second week of November, I came home from the clinic, and it was not. I checked the bedroom first. Gone. The closet. Gone. The living room. The spare room. The garage. Nothing. Then I heard the dryer running. I opened the dryer door and the smell hit me before I saw it. Bleach. Hot. Chemical. Unmistakable. The quilt was inside, tangled around itself like it had been fighting to escape. I pulled it out and held it up, and my hands knew before my mind did. It had shrunk. The patches that had been 8 inches square were now 5, maybe 6. The colors had bled and faded. The red flannel turned a washed-out pink, the denim pale and stiff, the white cotton now a mottled gray with bleach spots that looked like burns. 3 patches had torn along the seams. The green plaid Christmas shirt, the blue chambray from Earl's Sunday jacket, and the white cotton, the wedding shirt, ripped along a line that ran through the middle of the fabric like a wound that could not be closed. Patty had washed it, hot water and bleach, because, as she told Connor later that evening on the phone in a voice that carried absolutely no remorse, it smelled old and musty. 14 patches survived out of 23. I counted them sitting on the laundry room floor, the bleach still burning my nostrils, the fabric still warm from the dryer. I did not cry. I counted. 14 out of 23. I touched each surviving patch the way you might read Braille, slowly, deliberately, feeling for the memory the fabric still held. The red flannel was intact, faded to a soft pink, but still there. Earl's fishing shirt, still there. The denim from the overall was stiff and pale but whole. The teaching me to drive shirt, still there. But the white cotton, the wedding shirt from August 14th, 1965, was torn down the center in a line so clean it looked intentional, like the fabric itself had decided it could not hold together anymore. I sat on that laundry room floor for a long time. The tile was cold through my jeans. The dryer had stopped spinning, but the metal still ticked as it cooled, a small metronomic sound that measured nothing but time passing. Biscuit appeared in the doorway, looked at me, looked at the quilt, and walked over with the careful, deliberate steps of a cat who understands that something is wrong even if he cannot name it. He sat next to me and pressed his side against my knee, and we stayed like that, the two of us, in a laundry room that smelled like bleach and loss. I picked up my phone and called Grandma May. She answered on the 3rd ring, the way she always did, because May Johnson believed that answering on the 1st ring made you seem desperate, and answering after 4 was just rude. 3 rings was dignified. 3 rings said I was available but not waiting. "Hey baby," she said, "you caught me in the middle of a crossword. 7 letters, starts with R, means to make whole again. I am stuck on it." "Restore," I said. She paused. "Well, that is exactly right. How did you get that so fast?" I did not tell her. I did not tell her that her quilt, the one she had spent 7 months making, the one stitched from her dead husband's shirts with hands that could still thread a needle at 84, was sitting in a bleach-damaged heap on my laundry room floor. I did not tell her that 3 patches were destroyed, including the wedding shirt she had kept in tissue paper for 60 years. I did not tell her that the woman responsible had called it old and musty. Instead, I said, "I love the quilt, Grandma. I am looking at it right now." Which was true. I was looking at it. I was looking at it the way you look at something that has been broken by someone who did not understand what they were breaking, which is almost worse than if they had broken it on purpose. Because at least purpose implies awareness. Patty did not even have the decency to know what she destroyed. May told me about her week, the crossword puzzle book she was working through, her neighbor's new dog that barked at squirrels like it was being paid to do so, the tomato plant that was somehow still producing in November because Knoxville weather follows its own rules. I listened to every word. I held on to her voice the way I was holding on to the quilt, tightly, with both hands, afraid that if I let go of either one, I would fall into something I could not climb out of. We talked for 22 minutes. I know because I checked the call log later. 22 minutes of normal. 22 minutes of pretending nothing was wrong while sitting on a cold floor surrounded by the evidence that everything was. Connor came home at 6:15. He walked into the laundry room and saw me on the floor. He saw the quilt. He saw the bleach bottle on the counter, still open, because Patty had not even bothered to put the cap back on. He looked at all of it, and for the first time in our entire marriage, he did not say any of the 3 phrases. He did not say she is just really religious. He did not say it is a generational thing. He did not say music calms everything down. He sat down next to me on the tile floor, and he was quiet. Just quiet. And for about 4 minutes I thought maybe this was it. Maybe this was the moment. Maybe the quilt had done what the scripture cards and the artwork and the vinyl and even Biscuit could not. Maybe the sight of his wife on a laundry room floor holding a ruined quilt made from his wife's dead grandfather's shirts had finally made Connor Walsh see what I had been seeing for 8 months. Then his phone rang. He looked at the screen. "Mom." He answered it in the hallway. But our house is small, and sound carries the way it does in old bungalows, through walls and around corners, and straight into the ears of the person you think cannot hear you. His voice started soft. It stayed soft. I heard fragments. "I know, Mom. She is upset. I will figure it out." And then the sentence that ended whatever was left of my patience, my understanding, and my willingness to carry this alone. "I know, Mom. I will talk to her." Her, not you. Not Mom, we need to talk about what you did. Not Mom, you destroyed something irreplaceable. I will talk to her. I was the her. I was the problem to be managed. I was the variable in the equation that needed adjusting so that the other variable, the one with the key and the drill and the bleach, could continue operating without resistance. I sat on that floor and listened to my husband promise his mother that he would talk to me about the fact that she had destroyed my grandmother's quilt, and something inside me shifted with a sound that was not audible, but was absolutely real. Like a deadbolt sliding into place. Like a door closing that would not be opened again with an apology or a phrase or a Sunday dinner pot roast. I closed the notebook that night. I placed it in the nightstand drawer, and I did not open it again. Not because I was done, not because things had gotten better, because the notebook was not enough anymore. Columns and dates and handwritten entries could be argued with. They could be dismissed as dramatic. They could be waved away with, "She is just really religious the way you wave away smoke from a fire you refuse to acknowledge." What I needed was something different. Something cold and digital and precise. Something that could not be reinterpreted or softened or explained away. Something that logged every entry, every exit, every timestamp, with the mechanical indifference of a machine that does not care about feelings or family or faith. I needed numbers, cold, indisputable, time-stamped numbers, and I was going to get them. I spent 14 hours over 5 days reading home security reviews in the bathroom with the door locked, like a teenager hiding a phone from her parents. Except I was a 30-year-old veterinary technician hiding a browser history full of smart lock comparisons and motion sensor specifications from a husband who would have called his mother before I finished reading the first paragraph. I now know more about Bluetooth encryption protocols and Z-Wave compatibility than any person whose primary job involves drawing blood from Labrador retrievers has a right to know. I can tell you the difference between a Ring Alarm Pro and a Simply Safe base station with the confidence of a man at a tailgate explaining the difference between Memphis and Kansas City barbecue. It is not a skill I expected to develop at 30, but life has a way of turning you into an expert on things you never planned to study. Tasha was the only person who knew. I told her during a lunch break at the clinic while we were eating sandwiches in the break room that smelled permanently of antiseptic and anxiety, which is what every veterinary break room smells like, regardless of how often you clean it. She listened to my plan and nodded slowly, the way she nods when a client brings in a dog that has clearly eaten something it should not have, and she is already calculating the treatment before the owner finishes the sentence. Then she said, "So you are basically building a digital mousetrap for your mother-in-law." I said yes. She said, "Good. Make sure the trap has a receipt." The Ring alarm system cost $249.99. The August Wi-Fi smart lock cost $229.99. I bought both at the Lowe's on Charlotte Pike on a Wednesday afternoon during my lunch break, and I paid cash because I did not want the purchase on the joint credit card statement. Not because I was doing anything illegal, because I was doing something strategic. And strategy requires secrecy when the person you are strategizing around has a son who cannot keep a secret from her for longer than it takes to microwave a pot pie. The cashier at Lowe's, a man in his 60s with a name tag that said Dale and a mustache that said 1982, looked at my pile of security equipment and asked if I was worried about break-ins. I said something like that, which was technically the truth. I was worried about break-ins. I was just also the one who was going to be documenting them. I installed everything on a Saturday when Connor was at a session. The Ring alarm base station went in the hallway closet, motion sensors on the front and back doors. 3 cameras, one in the living room, one in the hallway, one in the kitchen. Small, discreet, the kind that looked like they could be a smoke detector if you were not paying attention. And Connor was not paying attention because Connor had the observational awareness of a man whose entire sensory system was routed through his ears. The August Wi-Fi smart lock replaced the deadbolt on the front door. Same finish, same position, same general appearance. When Connor came home that evening, he tested the door twice, nodded, and asked if the new lock was the same brand. I told him the old one had been sticking and the insurance company recommended an upgrade after a string of break-ins in the neighborhood. He accepted this the way he accepted most things I said about household logistics, with the uncritical trust of a man who believes that his wife handles the boring stuff so he does not have to. He did not ask about the keypad. He did not ask about the app. He did not notice the cameras. He went to the spare bedroom, put on a record from the 41 that survived, and disappeared into the music the way other people disappear into a bath. I programmed 4 codes, code 1 for me, code 2 for Connor, code 3 for Tasha. Because Tasha was the kind of person you give an emergency code to, the kind of person who shows up at 2 in the morning if you call and asks questions later, and also the kind of person who would change your locks for you if you asked. No explanation needed. Code 4, 7723, was for Patty. I chose 7723 because it meant nothing. No birthday, no anniversary, no biblical significance. Just 4 digits that the system would log every single time they were entered, with a timestamp accurate to the second, stored in a cloud server that did not care about family loyalty or generational differences, or what God made and did not make. Then I waited. Patty's old brass key did not work anymore, but here is the thing about Patty Walsh. She did not call to ask about it. A normal person would call. A normal person would say, "Hey, my key is not working. Did you change the lock?" Normal. Straightforward. Transparent. Patty drove to the house the following Tuesday at 12:50 in the afternoon. I know because the Ring doorbell logged it. She tried the key. It did not turn. She stood on the porch for about 40 seconds, which the camera captured in full color and high definition, and then she left. She came back Wednesday at 9:38 in the morning. Tried the key again. Left again. Thursday, she tried the back door, which also had a new lock. Same system, same app, same log. She did not mention any of this to Connor. She did not mention it to me. She came to our house 3 times in 3 days, failed to enter 3 times, and said nothing, which told me everything I needed to know about how Patty Walsh viewed that key. It was not for emergencies. It was not a convenience. It was access she believed she was entitled to, and when it stopped working, she did not ask permission. She tried again. On Friday, she called Connor and said something was wrong with the front door. Connor mentioned it that evening. I told him the new lock used a digital keypad and I could program her a code if she wanted. I said this in the same tone I used when offering a client a pamphlet about heartworm prevention. Helpful, neutral, completely professional. He said, "Just give her one." I gave Patty code 7723. She used it for the first time on a Tuesday at 1:35 in the afternoon. I was at the clinic drawing blood from a golden retriever named Captain when my phone buzzed. Code 7723. Used. Front door. Unlocked. I opened a new spreadsheet on my lunch break. Column A, date. Column B, time. Column C, duration. Column D, what changed. Column E, audio notes. The trap was set. The spreadsheet grew the way mold grows, quietly, steadily, and in conditions that no healthy household should allow. Week 1, 4 entries. Tuesday, 1:35 in the afternoon, 42 minutes. Thursday, 11:20 in the morning, 1 hour and 8 minutes. Saturday, 6:45 in the morning, 19 minutes. Sunday, 2:10 in the afternoon, 53 minutes. Saturday, 6:45 in the morning. I need you to sit with that for a second. My mother-in-law drove to my house at 6:45 on a Saturday morning while my husband and I were asleep in our bed, entered the code I gave her, walked into our home, and stayed for 19 minutes. 19 minutes of doing whatever Patty Walsh does in someone else's house at an hour when the sun has barely committed to being up. Connor heard the keypad beep. He rolled over, half-conscious, and mumbled something about whether the lock made that sound every time someone used it. My pulse went from resting to sprint in about 2 seconds. I picked up my phone, pretended to check the manual, and told him it was a standard security feature but I would look into the settings. He said, "Do not worry about it. Probably just the mailman or something." The mailman. At 6:45 in the morning. On a Saturday. Delivering what, exactly? Existential dread. Unsolicited spiritual guidance. A casserole nobody ordered. I turned off the beep that night. Not for Connor, for the data. I needed Patty comfortable. I needed her to feel safe using that code, to walk in and out of my house with the same casual confidence she had been exercising for 8 months, because the more comfortable she felt, the more entries I would collect. And the more entries I collected, the harder it would be for anyone, Connor included, to look at the numbers and say she means well. Week 2. 5 entries. She came on Monday at 3 in the afternoon and moved the bathroom towels from the rod to a shelf she had installed herself. She came on Wednesday at noon and left a pamphlet from her church on the kitchen table about a women's retreat called Renewing Your Spirit, which I thought was a little on the nose given that she was the reason my spirit needed renewing. She came on Friday at 10 in the morning and rearranged the spice rack, which I did not even know we had a wrong way of organizing until Patty Walsh decided that alphabetical was the only system God endorsed. Week 3. 6 entries. The numbers were climbing the way a fever climbs, steadily and with increasing cause for concern. She had settled into a rhythm. Tuesdays and Thursdays were her primary days. Saturdays were her early morning specials. Sundays, she occasionally visited after church, still wearing her choir robe, which the camera captured in stunning detail and which made her look like a religious superhero whose power was unauthorized entry. I color-coded the spreadsheet. Blue for weekday visits, green for weekend visits, red for visits that occurred before 7 in the morning, because I felt that pre-dawn home invasion deserved its own color. The red entries were multiplying. I want to pause here for a second, because if this story has meant anything to you so far, if you have been nodding along or yelling at your screen or thinking about your own Patty, I would really appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button. It genuinely means so much that you are here listening to this, and while you are at it, drop a comment and tell me where you are watching from and what time it is there. I read every single one, and honestly, some of you leave comments that are better than the story itself. Seriously, thank you. All right. Back to the spreadsheet. Tasha saw it during a lunch break at the clinic. I had my phone open on the break room table, scrolling through entries while eating a turkey sandwich, and she leaned over and stared at the screen for about 10 seconds without blinking. "Girl," she said, "this is either the most organized revenge I have ever seen or the pilot episode of a true crime podcast. Either way, I am subscribed." I told her it was not revenge. She raised one eyebrow, which was Tasha's version of a closing argument, and went back to her coffee. The mug said, "Not today." It had never been more accurate. By the end of week 3, the spreadsheet had 18 entries. 18 times Patty had entered my home without invitation in 21 days. I had notes on what she changed during each visit. Towels relocated, spice rack alphabetized, a new set of dish towels that were not mine hanging from the oven handle, a sticky note on the refrigerator that said low on eggs in her handwriting, as though she was managing our household inventory from a satellite office in Hendersonville. Once, she left a brochure for a cleaning service on the coffee table. A cleaning service, in my house, that I cleaned every Sunday. The brochure had a coupon clipped to it, 10% off the first deep clean. She had circled it in red pen. Week 4 brought 22 entries. Week 5 brought the number that would change everything. 26 times in 35 days, an average of 0.7 to 4 visits per day. My mother-in-law was visiting my home at a rate of approximately 3 out of every 4 days, and on the days she did not visit, she was probably resting for the next one. But the number was not the weapon. The numbers were the foundation, cold, clean, indisputable. They could not be softened with, she is just really religious. They could not be explained away with, it is a generational thing. They could not be dissolved by tears or prayers or pot roast. They were data, and data does not care about your feelings. The weapon was something else. The weapon was what the cameras recorded on entry number 19 on a Tuesday afternoon at 2:27, when Patty Walsh walked through my front door with 3 women I had never seen before, and the microphone in my living room captured every single word she said. By week 4, 22 entries. By week 5, the number that would change everything, 26 times in 35 days, but the number was not the weapon. The weapon was what the cameras recorded on entry number 19. Entry number 19, Tuesday, 2:27 in the afternoon. Duration, 1 hour and 41 minutes. But it was not the duration that mattered. It was the head count. The camera in the living room activated the moment the front door opened. Patty walked in first. She held the door open behind her, and 3 women I had never seen in my life walked into my house in single file like a procession. They were all roughly Patty's age, all wearing modest floral blouses that suggested they had coordinated without explicitly coordinating, and one of them was carrying a small glass bottle of blessed olive oil, the kind they sell at church supply stores with crosses on the label for $4.99. I watched the footage on my phone that evening, sitting in my car in the clinic parking lot because I did not trust myself to watch it inside the house where it had happened. The 4 women moved through my home like they were conducting a spiritual audit. The woman with the oil went to the front door first and traced the doorframe with her finger, leaving a thin line of oil along the wood. She moved to the hallway, then the kitchen doorway, then the bedroom door. Every frame, every threshold, anointing my house like it was possessed. A second woman, shorter, with reading glasses on a beaded chain, walked to my bookshelf and placed both hands flat on the shelf where my veterinary reference book sat next to a collection of Mary Oliver poetry that Grandma May had given me for my 25th birthday. She closed her eyes and began to pray. She was praying over Mary Oliver. I do not know what Mary Oliver ever did to this woman, but apparently wild geese was a threat to the spiritual integrity of my household. The third woman opened cabinets in the kitchen, the junk drawer, the cabinet above the refrigerator where I stored old birthday cards and Grandma May's recipe cards. She did not take anything, but she looked. She cataloged. She reported back to Patty with a nod that said everything the microphone did not need to pick up. And then there was Patty. She stood in the center of the living room, raised both hands, palms up, and spoke in a voice louder than prayer, but quieter than thought preaching. Lord, cleanse this home. Remove the darkness that has settled here. This house needs cleansing from her influence. She is leading my son away from the path you set for him. Bring him back, Lord. Bring my son back to the path. I played that sentence 4 times. Each time it landed the same way. Not like an insult, like a diagnosis. In Patty's mind, I was not her son's wife. I was a contamination. A spiritual pollutant that needed to be extracted through blessed olive oil and the combined prayer power of 4 women who had entered my house using a code I gave in good faith. I went back through the footage. Entry 11, 3 weeks earlier, 2 women. Entry 15, 3 women. Entry 23, 4 women, including one I had not seen before. The prayer circle was growing. Patty was recruiting. 4 times. She had brought strangers into my home 4 times. She had shared my security code with people I had never met. People who touched my things and prayed over my books and anointed my door frames and opened my cabinets while I was at work, weighing cats and checking heartbeats and doing the ordinary work of an ordinary life that apparently required spiritual intervention. The hallway camera caught something else. During entry 19, while Patty prayed in the living room, the woman with reading glasses walked into my bedroom. She opened the nightstand drawer on my side of the bed. My nightstand. My drawer. She looked inside, moved something, and closed it. I could not see exactly what she touched because the camera only caught the angle from the doorway. But she was in my bedroom, uninvited, opening my private things, while Patty prayed for my removal from my own family. I called Tasha at 9:30 that night. She answered on the second ring because Tasha Brooks answers on the second ring at 9:30 on a Tuesday without asking why before she says, "What do you need?" I told her everything. The oil, the prayers, the books, the cabinets, the nightstand drawer. She was quiet for about 4 seconds, which for Tasha was an eternity. "That is not praying," she said. "That is breaking and entering with essential oils." I laughed, but it was short and sharp and ended before it began. Because underneath the absurdity, underneath the image of 4 women anointing my door frames and praying over Mary Oliver, there was something that was not funny at all. Patty Walsh saw me as something to be removed, cleansed, exorcised from a home I paid for, from a marriage I showed up for, from a life I had built with a man whose mother believed I was the darkness. I spent that night making the video compilation. Not dramatic. No music, no title cards, just footage, timestamps, and audio. The raw truth of what happened inside my home when I was not there. Entry 19 in full. Entries 11, 15, and 23 as supplementary evidence. I saved everything to my phone, backed it up to my email, and stored a copy on a USB drive in my locker at the clinic. The question was not whether, not when, not how. The question was where. I knew exactly where Patty Walsh needed to hear those numbers and see that footage, not at a family dinner table. She would cry and deflect, and Connor would fold like a lawn chair in a windstorm. It had to be somewhere she felt untouchable. Somewhere she was the authority. Somewhere the audience already respected her, so the weight of the truth would land harder when it fell. The church potluck was in 2 weeks. First Sunday of December, Patty had signed up to bring her sweet potato casserole and deliver a testimony of gratitude. A testimony of gratitude. In the same church where she recruited women to pray for my removal from my own marriage. I was going to let her finish her testimony, and then I was going to give mine. 14 days. That is how long I had to smile at the woman who brought strangers into my home to pray for my removal from my own marriage while I sat across from her at Sunday dinner and said, "Yes, please," when she offered me a second helping of green bean. Casserole. 14 days of walking through my front door after work and checking the app before checking the mail. Of noting the new entry in the spreadsheet, logging the timestamp, recording what was moved or added or removed, and then putting my phone in my pocket and making dinner like a person whose home had not just been spiritually audited by a rotating cast of women in floral blouses. I have never been good at pretending. I am the kind of person whose face broadcasts my emotions the way a neon sign broadcasts the existence of a bar. Open, obvious, impossible to ignore. But for those 14 days, I performed. I smiled at Patty during Sunday dinner. I thanked her when she dropped off a container of soup I did not ask for. I responded to her text about a church bake sale with an exclamation point, which is the digital equivalent of a white flag. Meanwhile, Patty was decorating my house for Christmas. I should clarify. She was not helping me decorate. She was replacing my decorations with hers. I came home on a Tuesday during the first week of the wait and found that every personal touch I had placed on the shelves and surfaces of my living room had been removed and replaced with religious Christmas decor. A nativity scene sat on the shelf where my family photographs had been. A ceramic angel perched on the windowsill where Biscuit's water bowl backup used to sit. A wooden sign that read "Jesus is the reason for the season" hung on the wall where, 8 months ago, a watercolor of the Smoky Mountains had been before Patty replaced it with "The Lord is my shepherd" before I rehung the watercolor, before she anchored "The Lord is my shepherd" back into the drywall with hardware designed for load-bearing walls. My family photographs, including a framed picture of Grandma May holding Biscuit through a phone screen during their first FaceTime, were in a cardboard box in the garage, not thrown away, just removed, archived, filed under things that do not matter, in Patty Walsh's version of this house. I put the photographs back. She removed them again 2 days later. I put them back. She removed them. We were doing the wall cycle again, except this time it was shelves. And this time I did not have the energy to fight it more than twice, because I was saving every ounce of fight I had for December 7th. The certification exam was the other problem. I had been studying for the veterinary technician specialist exam for 4 months. The test fee was $350, non-refundable, and passing it meant a pay increase of $5,500 per year at the clinic. That raise mattered. We had stretched for the house, and every month the mortgage payment sat on our bank account like a rock on a lily pad, technically sustainable but one bad wind away from sinking. I studied at the kitchen table on my days off, which were Wednesdays and every other Saturday. Textbooks, flashcards, a highlighter system that used 4 colors and made sense only to me. It was the kind of studying that required silence and focus, and the specific kind of concentration that dissolves the moment someone walks into your house unannounced and starts rearranging your linen closet. Patty came on 3 of my study days during the wait, 3 out of 4. The first time, she arrived at 11 in the morning and vacuumed the living room while I was reviewing pharmacology notes at the kitchen table 10 feet away. I asked her politely if she could come back later. She looked at me with genuine confusion, like I had asked her to explain quantum physics in Mandarin, and said she would just be a minute. She was 47 minutes. The second time, she moved my study materials. Not dramatically, just enough. My flashcards, which had been organized by subject on the left side of the table, were now stacked in a single pile on the counter. My textbook had a bookmark in it that was not mine, a laminated prayer card with a verse about the virtues of a quiet and gentle spirit, which I interpreted as either a coincidence or a declaration of war. I chose war. The third time, she brought a friend from the prayer circle. They sat in my living room and talked for an hour and 12 minutes while I tried to study drug interactions in the next room. The friend laughed like a woman who had never been told that volume control was an option. I failed a practice exam that evening for the first time in 3 months. The certification exam was in January. The potluck was December 7th. I needed to survive 14 days, and then I needed Patty Walsh to stop entering my home so I could pass a test that would give my family $5,500 more a year. The stakes were not abstract. They were mathematical. And mathematics does not care about generational differences or prayer circles, or what God made and did not make. The irony of the season was not lost on me. Nashville in early December is beautiful. Lights on Broadway, wreaths on every door in East Nashville, the honky-tonks glowing like jukebox against the winter sky. Peace on earth, the decoration said. Goodwill toward men. Meanwhile, in my house, a woman was systematically erasing every trace of my identity from the shelves and praying for my spiritual removal from her son's life. And the son in question was tuning his guitar in the spare bedroom with his headphones on, hearing nothing, seeing nothing, choosing nothing. 12 days left, then 10, then 7. The spreadsheet kept filling. The video file sat on my phone like a loaded weapon with the safety on. And every night I lay in bed next to Connor and stared at the ceiling and rehearsed the words I was going to say in a church fellowship hall on a Sunday afternoon in front of 90 people and a sweet potato casserole. Patty called at 11 o'clock on a Thursday night, 3 days before the potluck. Connor's phone lit up on the nightstand and I watched the screen glow in the dark like a warning flare. "Mom," he answered before the second ring, which tells you everything about the hierarchy in that house. I could hear her voice through the receiver. Not the words, just the tone. High, trembling, the vocal equivalent of a woman clutching her pearls on a fainting couch. She was lonely. She was scared. The house was making noises. She thought she heard something outside. She needed Connor to come over. It was 11 at night. She lived in a condo in Hendersonville with a security system and a deadbolt and neighbors on both sides. She was not in danger. She was in control, pulling a string she had pulled 100 times before because Patty Walsh understood something about her son that I was only beginning to see. She did not need a key to control him. She did not need a drill or blessed oil or a prayer circle. She just needed to sound afraid, and he would come. Connor got dressed in the dark. He kissed my forehead, which is what he does when he is leaving to do something he knows I do not approve of, but has already decided to do anyway, and he drove to Hendersonville at 11:20 on a Thursday night because his mother heard a noise. He came home at 2:15 in the morning. I know because I was awake. I had been awake since the phone rang, lying in bed doing math in my head, not the mortgage math, the other kind. The kind where you calculate how much of your marriage belongs to you and how much belongs to a woman who lives 8 miles away and still manages to occupy more space in your husband's life than the person sleeping next to him. Connor had a session the next morning, a big one. A studio on Music Row had booked him for a full day of tracking on a country album that could lead to more work, the kind of steady, well-paying work that session musicians build their entire careers around. He needed sleep. He needed focus. He needed to show up sharp and prepared and present. He showed up exhausted. The session did not go well. He told me about it that evening in the kitchen, standing by the stove, looking at the floor the way he looked at the floor when he was disappointed in himself. He said his timing was off. He said the producer noticed. I did not say what I wanted to say, which was that his timing had been off since the day his mother got a copy of our key. Instead, I made dinner and we ate in a silence that was not hostile but was not peaceful either. It was the silence of two people who are standing in the same room but facing different directions. That was the moment I understood the full scope of it. Patty did not just control our home, she controlled Connor, not through anger or confrontation, but through need. Through the carefully timed phone call, the manufactured emergency, the trembling voice that activated something in him that was deeper than logic. She had been doing it for 32 years. She had been doing it so long that Connor did not even recognize it as control. He recognized it as love. He recognized it as duty. He recognized it as, music calms everything down, just give it time. Saturday night. The night before the potluck. Connor was asleep by 10:30, which was early for him, but the failed session had drained something from him, and he had been quiet all weekend in a way that felt less like peace and more like retreat. I lay in bed in the dark with my phone on my chest and opened the spreadsheet one last time. I scrolled through every entry, 26 rows of data, timestamps, durations, notes. The color coding I had spent an unreasonable amount of time perfecting, blue and green and red, a rainbow of unauthorized entry. 26 times in 35 days. 4 times with strangers. 1 audio recording of my mother-in-law praying for my removal from her son's life. 1 quilt destroyed. 6 vinyl records lost forever. 1 cat missing for 3 days. 1 failed practice exam. 1 anonymous letter. 1 set of family photographs boxed in a garage. And 1 husband who had heard all of it and responded with 3 phrases and a goodnight kiss on the forehead before driving to Hendersonville at 11 o'clock at night because his mother heard a noise. I was not nervous. I want you to know that. My hands were not shaking. My heart was not racing. I felt something closer to still. The kind of still that comes after you have been spinning for so long that your body finally gives up the momentum and just stops. I was not angry. I was not sad. I was ready. I had been ready since the laundry room floor. Everything between then and now had just been waiting. I closed the spreadsheet. I set my alarm for 6:30. I plugged in my phone and placed it on the nightstand, screen down, next to a book about Tennessee wildflowers I still had not read. Sunday morning, December 7th. I woke before the alarm. The house was quiet. Biscuit was curled at the foot of the bed, one paw over his nose, his crooked ear folded against the pillow like a secret he was keeping. I fed him first. Fresh water, half a can of the wet food he liked, the one that smelled like a crime scene but made him purr like a motorboat. Then I showered and put on the blue dress Grandma May had bought me for my birthday. Cornflower blue, simple, with small buttons down the front. May had picked it out herself at a department store in Knoxville, and when she gave it to me, she said, "This is the kind of dress you wear when you need to feel like yourself." I needed to feel like myself. I kissed Connor's cheek while he was still half asleep. He murmured something I did not catch. I picked up my keys, my phone, and a quiet certainty that had taken 9 months to build, and I drove to Grace Community Church on Long Hollow Pike. Patty's sweet potato casserole was already on the table when I walked in. She was standing near the dessert station, laughing with 2 of the women from Entry 19, holding a cup of coffee with both hands the way she held everything, like she owned it. She looked happy. She looked confident. She looked like a woman who had never once been told no in the house of God. That was about to change. Grace Community Church seats about 200 people on a good Sunday. That afternoon, for the potluck, there were maybe 90. Families with children running between the folding tables, elderly couples sharing plates, a group of teenagers slouched in the back row texting with the focused dedication of air traffic controllers. The fellowship hall smelled like every church fellowship hall in America, a combination of slow cookers, coffee that had been on the burner too long, and the faint sweetness of sheet cake from the Kroger on Indian Lake Boulevard. The tables were arranged in a U shape, covered with plastic tablecloths in alternating red and green, because it was the first Sunday of December and Grace Community Church took seasonal color coordination seriously. Patty's sweet potato casserole sat in the center of the main table like a crown jewel, flanked by a green bean casserole and a dish of mac and cheese that belonged to a woman named Ruth Ann, who made the same mac and cheese for every potluck and who would be personally offended if you did not take a second helping, which meant everyone took a second helping, whether they wanted it or not. I sat between Connor and Mrs. Kim. I had not asked Mrs. Kim to come. She attended Grace Community occasionally, not every Sunday, more of a holidays and potlucks member, the kind of congregant who shows up when there is food and disappears when there is a building fund campaign. But she was there that afternoon, 3 seats to my left, eating potato salad with the calm precision of a woman who knows something is about to happen and has decided to have a good seat for it. Connor was relaxed. He had no idea. He ate his plate of potluck food with the contented oblivion of a man who believes that Sunday afternoons are for eating and that nothing important has ever happened in a church fellowship hall. He was wrong about that, but he did not know it yet. Pastor Elaine Carter opened the testimony portion after the meal. She stood at the front of the hall, a woman of 58 with silver-streaked hair and a voice that carried the particular authority of someone who had been leading this congregation for 15 years and had heard every excuse, every confession, and every poorly disguised prayer request that was actually gossip. She invited anyone who wished to share a word of gratitude to come forward. Patty stood up immediately. She had been waiting for this the way a singer waits for the downbeat. She walked to the front of the hall with the posture of a woman who had rehearsed this moment in her bathroom mirror, which she probably had, because Patty Walsh did not do anything in public that she had not first perfected in private. She smiled at the room. She held her hands in front of her, fingers laced, chin slightly lifted. She looked like a woman delivering a keynote address at a conference she had organized herself. "I want to thank the Lord," she began, "for this community, for this church, for the women in my prayer circle who lift me up every single week." She paused and looked at the 2 women from entry 19 who were sitting near the front and who nodded on cue like backup singers hitting their marks. "I want to thank God for my family, for my son Connor, who is the light of my life, and for the blessing of being able to take care of the people I love. All I have ever wanted," she said, her voice softening to that particular pitch she used when she wanted people to feel something. "All I have ever wanted is to take care of the people I love." The room applauded. Politely, warmly. The way a congregation applauds when someone says something that sounds good and feels right and does not require any further examination. I let the applause finish. I let the room settle. I watched Patty return to her seat with the satisfied expression of a woman who had just nailed a performance, and I let her sit down and pick up her fork and take a bite of Ruth Ann's mac and cheese before I stood up. My heart was beating faster than I expected, not from fear, from the weight of the moment, the way your body knows before your mind does that something is about to change and there is no undoing it once it starts. I walked to the front of the hall. Pastor Carter looked at me with mild surprise because I had never spoken at a testimony before. I was not a regular speaker. I was not even a regular member. I was the daughter-in-law who showed up on Sundays and sat quietly and brought a pasta salad to potlucks and otherwise existed in the background of Patty Walsh's church the way a lamp exists in a room, present, functional, and entirely unnoticed. I stood where Patty had stood. I looked at the room. 90 faces. Some curious, some polite, some already checking their phones. "Since we are sharing testimonies today," I said, "I would like to share mine. It is about family too, and it is about truth, which I think matters in this building more than anywhere else." I took out my phone. The Bluetooth speaker system in the fellowship hall was the same one they used for worship music and announcements. I had connected to it when I arrived, before the meal, while everyone was setting up dishes and no one was paying attention to the woman in the blue dress standing near the speaker with her phone. I pressed play. The audio filled the room the way water fills a glass. Completely, immediately, with nowhere to go but up to the edges. Patty's voice, recorded in my living room, captured by a microphone she did not know existed, played through the speakers of her own church. Lord, cleanse this home. Remove the darkness that has settled here. This house needs cleansing from her influence. She is leading my son away from the path you set for him. Bring him back, Lord. Bring my son back to the path. The recording lasted 11 seconds. It felt like an hour. When it ended, the silence that followed was the kind of silence that has texture. You could feel it on your skin. You could hear it in the absence of every fork, every whisper, every rustle of a napkin. 90 people sat in a fellowship hall decorated for Christmas with red and green tablecloths and Ruth Ann's mac and cheese and Patty's sweet potato casserole, and no one moved. Patty's face did something I had never seen before. It cycled through 4 expressions in about 2 seconds. Surprise, because she did not know the recording existed. Anger, because she understood immediately what it meant. Calculation, because Patty Walsh's brain was always running the math on how to survive a situation. And then the one she landed on, hurt. She chose hurt the way she chose everything. Deliberately, strategically, and with the full expectation that it would work. Her eyes were already filling with tears. She was reaching for the victim position the way a drowning person reaches for a life ring, instinctively and without shame. But I was not finished. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. Numbers have their own volume. I held up my phone so the room could see the screen, though most of them were too far away to read it. That did not matter. They did not need to see the spreadsheet. They needed to hear what it said. Our front door has a smart lock, I said. It logs every entry, every code, every time, every date. I looked at Connor. He was staring at me with an expression I had never seen on him before, something between confusion and the very first edge of understanding, like a man who has just heard a sound in the distance and is trying to decide whether it is thunder or something closer. In the last 35 days, I said, Patty's code was used to enter our home 26 times. 26 times without an invitation, without a phone call, without permission. I let the number sit. 26. It is not a dramatic number. It is not 100. It is not 1,000. But in the context of a home that belongs to 2 adults who did not ask for a single one of those visits, 26 is a flood. 3 of those visits occurred before 7 in the morning, I continued, on days we were asleep. 6 occurred on days I work from home, and my manager has flagged my performance because of the noise and disruption during meetings. 4 of those visits included other people, women from this congregation, who entered my home using a code that Patty shared without my knowledge or consent. I paused. I looked at the 2 women from entry 19. They were no longer nodding. One of them was looking at the table. The other was looking at Patty with the expression of someone who has just realized they were cast in a role they did not audition for. I continued. In the past 9 months, my mother-in-law has entered my home and rearranged my furniture, replaced my artwork with religious decor, and reinstalled it with wall anchors when I put my own things back. She reorganized my kitchen, my bathroom, and my linen closet. She left my back door open in July, and my cat was missing for 3 days in 94-degree heat. When I told her, she said cats belong outside because that is how God made them. The room was motionless. Even the teenagers in the back had stopped texting. She removed 47 vinyl records that belonged to my husband's late grandfather, a man named Earl Walsh, who played guitar on the stage of the Grand Ole Opry in 1971, and she donated them to Goodwill because she considered them worldly music. 6 of those records, including one with Earl's own handwriting on the sleeve, were sold before we could recover them. They are gone forever. I heard Connor inhale. It was a small sound, the kind only the person sitting next to you can hear, but it carried the weight of a man who was hearing his own story told back to him for the first time by someone who was not his mother. She took a quilt my grandmother made for me, I said. My grandmother is 84 years old. She spent 7 months sewing that quilt from my late grandfather's shirts. 23 patches, each one cut from a shirt he wore. His fishing shirt, his wedding shirt, the shirt he wore the day he taught me to drive. Patty washed it in hot water and bleach because she said it smelled old. 9 of those patches were destroyed. The wedding shirt tore down the center. I did not describe the laundry room floor. I did not describe counting the patches or calling May or lying about the quilt being fine. Some things do not need to be said in public to be understood. The room understood. She sent anonymous letters to our neighbors accusing us of keeping feral animals. She moved my birth control. She bought study materials for a certification exam I am preparing for and rearranged them during 3 of my study sessions. She forwarded our mail to her own address. And she brought women into my home, 4 separate times, to pray for the removal of my influence from my husband's life. I looked at Patty. She was gripping the edge of the table with both hands, her knuckles white, her jaw set in a line that I recognized as the face she made when she was deciding how to play the next 30 seconds. I had seen that face before. It was the calculation face, the one that came right before she cried. Every single time I raised my voice about any of this, I said, her son, my husband, told me she was just really religious, or that it was a generational thing, or that music calms everything down, just give it time. I looked at Connor. His eyes were on the table, on the phone, on the spreadsheet he was now close enough to read. He was scrolling. I saw his thumb move across the screen. He stopped on a line. I knew which one. The 6:45 in the morning entry. The Saturday he heard the beep and thought it was the mailman. Patty turned to Connor. Say something, she said. Her voice was tight and controlled, but there was a crack in it, a fracture along the same fault line that ran through every interaction she had ever had when the outcome did not go her way. Connor looked up from the phone. He looked at his mother. He looked at me. He looked at Pastor Carter, who was standing near the front of the hall with her arms folded and her chin slightly lowered, which is the posture of a woman who has listened to everything and is about to say the only thing that matters. Pastor Elaine Carter stepped forward. She did not raise her voice either. She did not need to. 15 years of leading a congregation had given her the ability to fill a room with a whisper. Patty, she said, entering someone's home uninvited is not ministry. It is trespassing. And God does not need a house key to do his work. The sentence landed like a bell in an empty cathedral. It rang and it kept ringing. You could feel it in the silence that followed, in the way 90 people exhaled at the same time, in the way the fluorescent lights hummed overhead, as if even the building was holding its breath. Connor put my phone down on the table. He looked at his mother, and for the first time in the 2 years I had known him as a husband, the 3 phrases were gone. The set list was over. The playlist had stopped. Mom, he said, she is right, and I should have said it a year ago. 3 words that mattered. She is right. 2 years late. But he said them. And in that fellowship hall, between the mac and cheese and the sweet potato casserole, surrounded by 90 witnesses and a pastor who had just called his mother a trespasser in the house of God, those 3 words were enough. Patty opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. For the first time in the 63 years since Patty Walsh was born in Gallatin, Tennessee, she had nothing to say. Mrs. Kim, sitting 3 tables away, raised her iced tea in my direction. She did not say a word. She did not have to. Somewhere in the church kitchen, someone dropped a serving spoon. It was the loudest sound in the building. Connor did not turn on the radio. That was the first thing I noticed. In 3 years of marriage, Connor Walsh had never driven more than 4 minutes without music. He had a playlist for grocery runs. He had a playlist for oil changes. He once made a 47-song playlist for a 2-hour drive to Knoxville just because the weather looked like a Neil Young kind of afternoon. But that Sunday night, driving home from Grace Community Church on Long Hollow Pike, the only sound in our truck was the hum of tires on cold asphalt and the occasional click of the turn signal. I sat in the passenger seat with my phone in my lap. The screen was still open to the spreadsheet, column A through column E. 26 entries, 35 days. I closed the app and watched the streetlights pass over the dashboard in slow yellow pulses. Connor's hands were at 10 and 2. His jaw was set but not clenched. His eyes were on the road, but I could tell he was not seeing the road. He was somewhere else. Somewhere between his mother's face when the audio played and Pastor Elaine's voice when she said the word trespassing. We pulled into the driveway at 8:43. The porch light was on. The Ring camera logged our arrival. The August lock accepted Connor's code on the first try, and the front door opened into a house that smelled like the cinnamon candle I had lit that morning before we left. Biscuit was on the couch, curled into a tight orange circle on the left cushion, exactly where I had left him. Nothing had been moved, nothing had been rearranged, nothing had been cleansed. Connor set his keys on the hook by the door. He took off his jacket and hung it on the third peg, the one closest to the wall. He walked past the hallway without looking at the spot where the Last Supper print used to hang. He went to the kitchen, opened the fridge, stared at the middle shelf for about 12 seconds, then closed it without taking anything. I sat on the couch next to Biscuit and waited. He came back into the living room and stood near the window. He looked at the street for a long time, then he looked at me. "I should have listened to you." 5 words, no playlist behind them, no catchphrase. Not "she is just really religious," not "it is a generational thing," not "music calms everything down, just give it time." 5 words that sounded like they had been sitting in his chest for months, maybe longer, pressed flat under the weight of loyalty and habit, and 32 years of a woman who loved him so hard she forgot how to stop. I did not say anything right away. I wanted to. I had imagined this moment more times than I could count. I had rehearsed responses in the shower, in the car, during slow afternoons at the clinic while weighing a poodle named Ginger. But now that it was here, none of those responses felt right, so I just nodded. He sat down on the opposite end of the couch. Biscuit opened one eye, looked at Connor, then closed it again. Even the cat knew this was not a moment for interruption. "I kept telling myself she meant well," Connor said. He was looking at his hands. "I kept telling myself that was just how she showed love, but 26 times, 4 strangers. The quilt." He paused. "She washed Grandma May's quilt with bleach." "I know," I said, "and I told you she felt terrible." "I know." She did not feel terrible. She felt justified. That was the sentence that mattered. Not the apology. Not the 5 words. That one. She did not feel terrible. She felt justified. Because Connor had finally seen what I had seen for 2 years. Patty Walsh did not enter our home 19 or 26 or 40 times because she was generous or helpful or lonely. She entered because she believed she had the right to. She believed that her son's home was an extension of her authority, and my presence in it was an obstacle to be cleansed, rearranged, prayed over, and gradually erased. Connor's phone buzzed on the kitchen counter at 9:14. He did not move. It buzzed again at 9:17, and again at 9:21. 3 calls in 7 minutes. He looked at me. "That is her," he said. "I know. I am not answering. Okay?" He picked up the phone, looked at the screen, and set it face down on the coffee table. The buzzing stopped at 9:24. A voicemail notification appeared. He did not play it, neither did I. We sat in that living room with the cinnamon candle burning low and Biscuit purring between us, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, the house felt like it belonged to 2 people. The next morning, I opened the August Lock app on my phone. I went to the access code screen. Code 1, Adrian, active. Code 2, Connor, active. Code 3, Tasha, active. Code 4, 7723, Patty. I pressed the red button. Deactivate. The app asked me to confirm. I confirmed. The code disappeared from the list like it had never existed. No alert was sent. No notification. No dramatic sound effect. Just a quiet deletion of 4 digits that had unlocked 26 entries, 4 stranger visits, 1 ruined quilt, 6 lost vinyl records, 1 missing cat, 1 failed practice exam, and 2 years of silence from the man sitting across from me drinking coffee. Connor watched me do it. He did not ask me to wait. He did not say, "Maybe we should talk to her first." He sipped his coffee, scratched Biscuit behind the ear, and said, "I should have done that myself." And maybe he should have, but I had stopped keeping score. The spreadsheet was closed. The notebook was in the drawer. The yellow legal pad with its 3 neat columns, date, what changed, what disappeared, had one final entry, December 7th. Nothing changed. Nothing disappeared. For the first time in 712 days, that was true. It is a Thursday night in December, and I am standing in my hallway. Not pacing. Not checking the Ring app. Not counting entries on a spreadsheet or writing in a yellow legal pad or listening for the sound of a code being punched into a lock that no longer recognizes the person punching it. I am just standing here, barefoot on the hardwood, looking at a hallway that finally looks like mine. The walls are bare in some places. There are small holes where Patty's screws used to be, 3 on the left side, 2 on the right, plus 1 anchor hole near the ceiling where the gold thread cross-stitch hung for 4 months. I have not filled them yet. I bought the spackle. It is sitting on the kitchen counter next to a bag of clementines and a roll of paper towels. But every time I pick up the putty knife, I put it back down. I think I am not ready to erase the evidence. Not because I want to remember the pain, but because I want to remember that I survived it. The Smoky Mountains watercolor is back in its place. Connor reframed it last weekend, drove 20 minutes to a frame shop on 8th Avenue, and paid $41 for a matte black border that makes the blue ridgeline look sharper than it ever did. He hung it with brass nails, not screws. When I asked why brass, he said, because that is what was there before. He did not say anything else. He did not need to. Biscuit is asleep on the hallway runner. He does this now. Every evening around 8:30, he migrates from the couch to this specific spot, about 4 feet from the front door, and curls into that tight orange circle like he is guarding the entrance. Maybe he is. He spent 3 days lost in East Nashville because someone left the back door open, and I think a part of him decided he would never let the door go unwatched again. I do not know if cats think that way, but I know that every night he is there, and every night I step over him carefully, and every night I feel a little safer because of it. The quilt is on the wall now, not the bed. Connor built a simple oak frame, sanded it by hand, and we mounted what remained of Grandma May's patchwork behind glass, 14 patches out of 23. The red flannel is there. The denim is there. The white cotton wedding shirt is torn at the center seam, and you can see the gap where the fabric pulled apart, but we left it exactly as it is. May saw a photo of it on my phone during our last Sunday call. She was quiet for a few seconds, and then she said, "Well, it looks like a museum piece now." She laughed. I almost cried. But it was the good kind of almost crying, the kind where the tears sit right at the edge and warm your face without falling. Connor's vinyl shelf is full again, 41 records in their original order, organized by a system that makes no sense to anyone but him. There is a gap on the second shelf where 6 records used to be. The signed Grand Ole Opry sleeve from fall 1971 is still missing. Earl Walsh Sr.'s handwriting is gone, sold to a stranger at a Goodwill on Gallatin Pike for probably $1.50. Connor does not talk about it. But sometimes I catch him looking at that empty space the way you look at a chair where someone used to sit. Patty has not been inside this house since December 7th. That is 81 days. I do not keep a log anymore, but some numbers you just know. She calls Connor on Sundays. He answers, sometimes. The conversations are short. She has not apologized. She has not acknowledged the spreadsheet, the audio, the potluck, Pastor Elaine's words, or the 26 entries that told the story her son refused to hear for 2 years. She did send a card on Connor's birthday. It said, "To my precious son. Love always, Mom. No mention of me. No mention of Biscuit, no mention of the quilt or the records or the 3 women who anointed my door frames with $4 olive oil. I passed my veterinary technician specialist certification exam on January 15th. The fee was $350. The raise is $5,500 a year. Tasha bought me a coffee mug that says, certified to deal with animals and in-laws. It sits on my desk at the clinic next to a framed photo of Biscuit and a small cactus named Gerald. I look at it every morning and I smile. Not because the joke is funny, but because Tasha believed I would pass even when I failed that practice exam in November with a prayer group guest talking in my kitchen for 1 hour and 12 minutes. Mrs. Kim brought over a plate of kimchi pancakes last week. She did not say why. She just knocked, handed me the plate, and said, "Your house is quiet now. That is good." Then she walked back to her porch 2 doors down, sat in her rocking chair, and opened a crossword puzzle book. I think that was her way of saying she was proud of me. I ate every single pancake. I still have the yellow legal pad. It is in the bottom drawer of the nightstand, under a novel I keep meaning to finish, and a phone charger I never use. The last entry is dated December 7th. Nothing changed. Nothing disappeared. I have not opened it since. But I keep it, the same way I keep the spackle on the counter and the quilt on the wall and the gap on the vinyl shelf, because some things are worth remembering even when they hurt. A brass key costs $4.75 at any hardware store in America. You can copy one in under 2 minutes. It fits on a keychain and slides into a pocket and opens a door without making much sound at all. But what it unlocks is never just a door. It is a boundary. And once that boundary is gone, you spend years trying to rebuild it with legal pads and spreadsheets and smart locks, and one terrible, beautiful night at a church potluck where you finally say out loud what everyone already knew. My hallway is quiet now. Biscuit is on the runner. The watercolor is on the wall. The porch light is on. And the only code that matters is the one I chose for myself. Would you have waited as long as I did?